Hey folks, Dust here, and since we have a little bit of a lull in play after a very busy September with the Major and ESL1 New York and Blast Pro Series in Istanbul, thought I'd start catching up on some of the roster news that was going on with some of these different teams in the international scene, and I'll start close to home with a team I followed for a very long time. As you know, North American Counter-Strike has always been something my content has focused on, so I felt that there was kind of a gap in coverage that wasn't really being addressed in the scene, so I kind of wanted to be able to add that. And so we'll talk about really Cloud9 over this last year and all the multiple roster changes they've been through, but obviously we'll focus on the present and what their future outlook looks like, obviously with their most recent roster change being Flusha coming in, filling the vacancy left behind of Statistical, who have been playing with the team for several months. And obviously Golden himself is only a very recent addition, has only been with the team for a few months in his own right. And really, you know, I kind of talked about Cloud9 a little bit in my post-major video when I did the Americas in the major, and already kind of touched on many of the problems that this team had been having going into the major. You know, the obvious roster chaos with the whole mishandled Finesse situation, in my opinion, on how he was brought in to in-game lead, but somehow they didn't really understand what his vision was going to be, understand that it, you know, had conflict with what their vision was, and so they wound up benching him, and now they have Golden in as the in-game leader. Obviously, the losses of Tarek and Stewie 2K, and really the struggles that some of their other core players are having right now with Rush and Skadoodle. It's really been a nightmare. You know, obviously, you know, they had this situation at Marseille where they had some promise beating G2 in FaZe, but then they get embarrassed by Gambit in an O2 series. And then, you know, it's at Sydney where they aren't really able to beat anyone other than like Greyhound and Order. Obviously losing to Tyloo in FaZe there, then getting knocked out of the EPL finals by Heroic in FaZe, with their only win being over Sharks, which they did drop a map to, actually. They got knocked out of the ECS finals by Astralis and Fnatic, which fair enough, Astralis one of the best teams in the world. And some of these other events I'm talking about, they're losing to FaZe, fair enough, you know, top 3 team in the world. But the problem is that this team used to be one of the best teams in the world towards the end of 2017 and obviously into the major that they won at the very beginning of this year. So you would hopefully think that they should be scoring some series and some map wins against these elite level teams if they hope to remain elite themselves. But you can really just see that through all the losses of their star players and big playmakers, they haven't really been able to find a way to adjust, and no one's really stepped up in the wake of those players leaving to keep Cloud9 truly competitive against elite teams of the world, which they used to be able to go toe-to-toe with, again, when you date back maybe 8 to 12 months ago or something like that. And then you get into more recent times. Obviously, the major didn't go well, a 1-3 record there. Their only win was against Windstrike, and I think that was even a game that they really struggled to actually close out. They obviously lost to Vega Squadron really big. You know, they did have some overtime losses to Hellraiser, and I think double overtime against G2. So they were somewhat competitive in the maps they played, but still a 1-3 record. All you've really done there is make sure that you don't have to play in the next minor. At least they're able to keep a challenger spot, but nothing really gained from the major. And then at Blast, they got blasted. I mean, the only win they got was against Space Soldiers on Mirage. And then when you look at some of the other games, I mean, they weren't even really competitive except a loss to fucking Virtus Pro. Like, that's not really meaningful at all to have a close loss to Virtus Pro, given all the challenges that they've had, you know, with all the roster departures, Bialy and Snacks, you know, obviously off the table. And I mean, that's just kind of ridiculous. And they weren't even competitive at all against to NIP or Astralis or really to MIBR either on that Dust 2 game. So it's just been really rough times. That's why I say a dark sky for Cloud9. I mean, that was kind of obviously a really cheeky and shitty little reference or whatever. But, you know, it really has been a struggle. In fact, if you want to look at some numbers here, in the last 5 LAN events that Cloud9 has attended, they've only won 4 maps out of 22. That really speaks for itself. Now, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you can give them a little bit of a break because half those games were losses to either Astralis Navi or MIBR. So they lost 6 times to Astralis, twice to Navi, and 3 times to MIBR, and twice to Fnatic. But some of the other teams they're losing to are teams like VP, who have obviously had their struggles, G2, who have had their struggles, though at times they can throw up a pretty good series. I mean, at least looked semi-impressive over in New York and had a series win over Mouse Sports in a previous tournament. Yeah, they've lost to Hellraiser, Vega Squadron, and NIP as well. They also had a map win over NIP at one point. And Vega Squadron was messing with a lot of people at the major, to be fair. And Hellraisers has always been a team that has talent, like I said, and Woxic that can be a cool upset team. But again, like if we go back, this used to be a team that, you know, guys like Rush and Automatic, when they had some of their other players, were able to challenge against these guys and be ranked better than them and be able to be one of the better teams in the world. So these numbers aren't good. And then if you get out of those last 5 events, out of that only winning 4 maps out of 22, I mean, even at EPL, They only won 2 out of 6 maps. You know, the only map wins they got were against Sharks, by the way, and they lost a map to Sharks, and they wound up losing to Heroic, a team that surely they would have wanted to take care of, earlier in the year or late into last year. And so, it's like, what does Cloud9 even do at this point? They just picked up Flusha, obviously a guy who is one of the most notable peripheral role players in CSGO history. He's always been like a really good lurk, edge of the map type player. Has flexed sometimes when he's been an in-game leader or when they've had other players on the Fnatic days. He would sometimes flex his role, especially in the very loose periods of Fnatic. What I mean by loose periods, the periods where they had very limited structure and relied on fast-paced aggressive play. It wasn't as well defined that he would always play the edge of the map, but typically speaking, that's been kind of what he's been known for. He definitely can do that to a serviceable level. But we know that he really had his struggles towards the tail end of Fnatic, really didn't have too many good events this year other than some of the events that they won with Golden as the in-game leader. And maybe this is a good pairing going forward, Golden and Flusha. Not sure what the drama might be between them, with Golden being cut from Fnatic back in the day, but maybe it was other players he had issues with. Maybe it wasn't Flusha, or maybe they were able to resolve it and that's water under the bridge. But maybe that could be something. But when you look at the rest of this team, there just seems to be a lot of players that really aren't stepping up. For example, with Rush, I could understand if his T sides lacked to some degree, and maybe just overall he wasn't playing as well as he did in his Optic days, because he was on a team where he had to make the biggest sacrifice, I think. It felt like guys like Terex, Stewie2K, Automatic kind of got some of the star roles, some of the things that they wanted to do, some of the things that they were most known for. And Cloud9 in their heyday at late 2017, early this year, were really reliant on a fast-paced play style. And so they really were using more of Terex, Stewie2K, and even Automatic to a degree to be those guys that were going in first or being trade fraggers. And sometimes Rush was like playing squeaky door on a cache, or playing peripheral roles opposite of one of their other players. And so he wasn't as involved as he had been in the Optic days, where he really was like a first, second guy in, very good entry, second entry type player. Definitely was putting up big numbers during Optic's, successful times at E-League Season 2 and so the other tournaments around that time period. I could see it. I was like, okay, like clearly the front runners of this team are Max, Dewey, and Tarek. Skadoodle's going to have to take a backseat with the AWP. Rush is maybe going to take more of a backseat on T sides, but still hold some of his spots on CT, like Lane on Inferno, for instance, where he could still put up numbers on the defensive side and be like a really good side anchor in some situations, and other situations be able to kind of move around and just be a part of the dynamic flow that they wanted to have on their CT aggression. But now this should be where he steps back into an entry fragging role, and he should be one of the big names for this team again, should be one of the star players for this team again. In fact, they really need him to do that because they've lost a lot of star power. He needs to be the one that fills those shoes, and it just hasn't really happened to the level that I think it needs to yet for this team to have any hopes of doing anything with Rush at the forefront of their lineup. I'm not sure if this is something that Rush can work on over time and eventually get back to his old form and eventually be that entry type fragger that Cloud9 desperately needs and that he used to be able to fulfill, but something has to happen there, that really needs to be said. When it comes to Skadoodle, again, similar to Rush, I could understand the backseat role he took when he had so many prolific and aggressive riflers in front of him. And again, that was the focus tactically of that Cloud9 team. It was to be that very fast-paced style of play. It was, something where I could understand why he wasn't going to shine like he did during his big summer 2015 glory run, or even throughout his history in the NA scene from very early on up until maybe the last 2 or 3 years, where he was that guy that had that reputation of being one of the best operators in North America. I could understand it, but now he needed to be that other guy next to Automatic and Rush that was a star level player for this team for them to have any real success. And I mean, sure, if you're picking up Flusha, maybe you're relying on him, Rush, and Automatic to be kind of your star level players. That's great and all, but it's getting to a point where I'm really getting concerned for Skadoodle. I think he still has value in some situations. I think he's still a really good late round player. I think he makes really good decisions in clutch situations. I actually think Skadoodle would maybe be a really good support rifler. I know this is kind of an odd thing to say since he's been an opera his whole life and at points in time was one of the best operas in the world, and certainly for most of his career was one of the best operas in the North American region. But just the way that he's willing to be more supportive and willing to take a back seat, the fact that he's really good in clutch situations, and in the late round, he's a good guy to have in 2v2s and 3v3s. And again, he always seems to make the correct decision to give himself the best chance to win the round, even if his aim isn't there to win the round or something like that. It seems like his decision making is really good in those moments. So I think he might be able to add value as some type of support rifler, but as a primary opera, I just don't see it anymore. You know, I was one of the ones that was still kind of holding on to that idea while a lot of other analysts were already like, nah, that's not going to happen. Now I have to kind of accept their analysis, because it does seem like if he was ever going to step back up, if he's ever going to be a star level player again, it was going to happen right now, when it had to be him and Russia Automatic, with having an actual true in-game leader back in the team again. Granted, they did have finesse for a short time, but obviously the time when like Stewie and Tarek were leading this team, they weren't really traditional in-game leaders. Now you have a guy who did put that focus in, who did show you something on Fnatic as a leader, and you know, this should be the moment where he's rising to the occasion again, and it doesn't seem to be happening, and it doesn't seem like it's going to, unless something crazy dramatic happens in the next few months or something like that. So there is some very big worries. You have to worry if Flusha is going to be able to return to some type of high form again as well. And you know, Golden, you got to wonder what he's going to be able to do. Yeah, he did have his bright moments with Fnatic, but what can he do with this Cloud9 team? What can he do in a different environment with a completely different hand he has to play than what he had back when he was on a full Swedish lineup and he had these really strong veterans and such? You know, there's a lot of question marks with this Cloud9 team, but I find it really hard to know what they could possibly do to take a step up, to take a step forward. It does seem like some more roster changes are going to be needed at some point. Like they're going to need a stronger primary opper, or they're going to need to find a better entry force, like a better entry rifle that can really help them find openings or something like that. It just does seem like they are very much lacking for opening power and star power. I mean, Automatic's really the only player on this team that I feel like I can consistently rely on to do his job and to do what is needed to help this team out. So, I mean, props to him. He's definitely still out there doing what he can do, but there needs to be more around him, obviously. And I mean, to add to this whole thing about Rush as an entry fragger and this idea of Cloud9 needing that ability to open up things, I mean, the detail is that Rush's numbers have been really poor the last few LAN events, and their T-sides have often been one of the biggest problem areas for the team. And when you look at some of those matches at Blast, even going into the Major, I mean, hell, even against teams like Vega Squadron and Windstrike, I think in some of those games, they were like really low single digits on their T-sides, and that really persists. I mean, they made a slight comeback on their T side against Astralis on Inferno, but they started out really poor there. And again, most of the maps, outside of like maybe one game against MIBR at E-League Premier and maybe a couple of the maps here and there out of those, you know, big losses I've been talking about, their T sides have been the worry. And you could pin some of that on in-game leadership, maybe, but I think a lot of it goes to the fact that they've put Rush back into an entry fragger position, and he struggles to find those openings that he used to find on Optic. And you don't really have Skadoodle as a big opping target either to be able to open up maps. So it's just like, who the hell is going to do it? It seems like Golden sometimes has to try to do it's like a sacrificial entry IGL, but he really shouldn't be having to do that. And yeah, sure, you can rely on Automatic to maybe make a play on the edge of the map to get you an opening, or when you do a certain execute, maybe he can still kind of mix in as a trade fragger and find you kills, because he has been kind of that rock still for this team. But there has to be more to Cloud9 as far as opening power. There's no doubt about that. Either players need to step up or get out of the way kind of situation is what Cloud9's in right now. And so it's really hard to see what they're going to be able to do. It feels like certainly something has to break, some change has to be made, more than just bringing Flusha in. You know, maybe, you know, Golden and Flusha can be a good duo. Maybe that's something you can kind of build around. Maybe you keep Automatic. Maybe you do have a little bit of something as far as a core that you can try to set in. But outside of that, man, like, it does feel like you need one or two more roster boos before anything happens. I'm not even sure who they should target. There's obviously names out there that could be better fraggers that might be worth looking into. You know, I'm not even going to bother naming them because I think there's several within the NA region, but obviously that means you're trying to steal players from teams like Energy or Liquid or some of the other big dogs in the region, which I don't even know if you have the level of attractiveness that would be able to bring over a player like that. Probably most of those guys feel like they're in a way better spot and wouldn't think about it unless it was just because there was just such a super sick offer financially. And then, yeah, there's some international players out there like a Kiwashima, like a Scream, like some other names out there in Europe that you could maybe look at that could probably add a lot of value to this team. But I'm not sure how likely it is you'd be able to even get them if they'd be interested. So it's really hard to go down that speculative path where I try to sit here and name names out there that could come in. But again, certainly something needs to happen. And this Cloud9 team definitely seems to be in one of their darker periods in a very long time. And you know, even some of the other times where things look rough, you could at least maybe see a path to them getting better, a way for them to improve. You could see very clear problem areas that could be addressed, and there were moves out there that made sense to solve them. But now it's a lot harder to do that. It's a lot more murky waters. And so, yeah, just wanted to do a video to talk a little bit about kind of Cloud9 throughout this year, all the roster changes, their most recent addition with Flusha, and really what their outlook is going forward, which to me is very gray, very dark skies indeed. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.